I never get tired of doing wave paintings. It's one of my favorite things to do when I'm not feeling particularly motivated. Also when it's overcast, it's a good time to work on color because the color is really stable on overcast days. So today I'm working on a 15 by 30 inch panel, a little bit bigger than normal. Typically I'll do an 11 by 22, but I'm hoping to have a little more room to swing the brush. All right, so I've got the Anderson easel, and as I mentioned, a 15 by 30 inch panel. I've got an assortment of brushes here, but I'm probably going to be using these natural bristle flats. I've got a number 10 and a number 8. My usual palette of colors. I do have a guest color today, cobalt teal. This might be handy for, you know, some of those aqua blue colors in the white water. And I'm using Liquin as my medium. This is Liquin Original, and I've got odorless mineral spirits in a brush washer. I am toning using burnt sienna. I'm thinning it with odorless mineral spirits. I like to have the bits of orange from the burnt sienna popping through, especially when I'm working with mostly cool colors. You know, it's nice to have the warm and cool to play off each other. I will be looking for subtle shifts of warm and cool within the water, but overall, the scene is pretty cool in temperature. I keep the mixture thin. I'm thinning with odorless mineral spirits. All right, so I'm sketching in burnt sienna as well, and I'm trying to keep the shapes kind of spontaneous. I've started by working, you know, large shapes and then getting a little bit more specific. And obviously I'm just, you know, kind of looking for patterns that look appealing, like say with a breaking wave, you know, some white water here, and then a portion of breaking wave there. And everything can be changed. So if I don't like something, I just wipe it out and then change it. All right, and there's wet sand. There's sort of some motion. And I'm kind of going to indicate that. I don't know how much of that will stay in the finished painting. All right, so first I'm going to mix up a color for the water here. And I'm just going to go with an average sort of dull blue-green, starting with a mixture of ultramarine blue, titanium white, a bit of burnt sienna, and also some cadmium yellow medium. I'm using my palette as a gauge to determine the value. I'm starting off with a mid-tone value. My palette is a mid-tone gray, so I can gauge, you know, I can gauge the value of the color I'm mixing by comparing it to my palette. And I want this color to be light enough in value that I get some nice color in there, like it's not too dark, but I also want it to be dark enough so that the white water stands out. And I'm using my large brush here, keeping the mix thin, trying to keep things spontaneous. I don't want to be too careful. And a lot of times I'm sort of mimicking the fluid nature of the water with the paint. So by keeping it kind of loose and or keeping the paint thin, you know, I can kind of mimic the some of the motion. And even though this is the scrub in, I will be leaving some of this energy in the final painting. One thing I used to do in the past was I used to make my waves way too big. So you can see, like, the waves are, you know, decent size today, but they're quite far away. I don't want to make them too large. It'll look sort of unrealistic and out of scale. This brush is a number 10 natural bristle, and it seems to be about the right size for the job here. I'm able to add a lot of paint, or, you know, cover a lot of panel pretty quickly. All right, so next I'm going to mix a color for the sky. I'm starting off with titanium white, ultramarine blue, and a touch of burnt sienna to kind of gray it down. As I mentioned, I gray down with complements, and the burnt sienna is sort of an orange color, so it's you know, the complement of blue. Perfect way to kind of gray down ultramarine, and still working quickly. I do like to maintain some transparency in the sky, and you know, I like having areas of transparency and then areas of thickness. Sometimes if I feel like the brushwork is a little too active in the sky, I'll come back later and do a glaze, which is basically, you know, I'll take a similar color and thin it with liquid and kind of come over the top, and that'll calm down these brush strokes. But I do like to start out, you know, having the active brushwork in the sky. All right, and I'm looking for values as well. Like, I want the whitewater of the waves to stand out, so I'm looking at the value relationship between the lightest lights and then the surrounding values. All right, next I'm going to mix up a color for the wet sand here, and I'm going with a mixture of titanium white, a bit of dioxazine purple, and then this sort of gray mixture here, which is a mixture of burnt sienna, ultramarine, and some titanium white. And I'm going to try to keep this brushwork loose and spontaneous and have some directional energy in the brushwork as well. All right, now I'm adding a bit of yellow ochre and titanium white for the dry sand portion. There's a little bit more warmth to the dry sand, but it's very similar in value. I'm going to be adding bits of reflected sky on this darker portion here as well, but for now, just approximating colors. So next I'm going to mix up some color for the whitewater, and what I'm noticing is that the whitewater in the distance is almost like, it almost has like a slight minty green tint to it, whereas the whitewater in the foreground has more of a purple tint. So for the minty whitewater, I am using titanium white with a touch of cobalt teal and a tiny bit of cad yellow medium. I need to put in this whitewater so I know what my lightest value is, and then I can adjust the surrounding colors. I am liking this large panel. It definitely gives me some more room to swing the brush. All right, and over here I've mixed up some titanium white with a touch of dioxazine purple for the whitewater in the foreground. All right, so I will be adding some dark portions right under the leading edge of this whitewater. So you can see it right here. There's like a dark, almost like a dark line underneath the edge of the whitewater. All right, so at this point I've got approximate colors blocked in, and I've got my, you know, compositional idea kind of mapped out here. And the next step is to get back from, you know, the painting, and I'm standing back about 10 feet, and I want to look at the painting and look at the scene and make whatever color adjustments I need to make, value adjustments, and also obviously compositional adjustments. I think the sky is pretty accurate, but the water is definitely too green, and it's actually too warm of a green. I'm seeing a more dull gray green out here. However, some of that color is going to get covered with sky reflection. So as I've talked about before, the color of the water is kind of, there are two things going on. There's the color of the water itself, which you'll see when the wave is rising up, and then there's also the color of the reflected sky on the surface of the water. So what I'm seeing is that the water in the background is a darker grayer color, and then the water in the foreground is greener, and then there's bits of sky reflection over everything. right, so I'm gonna really punch up the minty color in the distance. So I'm using titanium white, cobalt teal, and then cadmium yellow lemon. And I want this to be in the breaking waves out in the distance here. There's quite a bit, and I'm just gonna add it somewhat randomly. And I wanna leave some of that burnt sienna showing through. There's also a little bit in here too, closer. Not as much though. I was noticing way too much green in here, and I was seeing more of a sort of purplish blue tone, you know, and it's obviously the reflected sky. So that's what I did. I just kind of came in and added some of that reflected sky, and then also bits of reflected broken wave as well. That gives the water, you know, the look of being wet because of those reflections. And then I started adjusting the sand color here as well, because I was noticing that the sand is much grayer than I have in my painting. So I made up a mixture here of dioxazine purple and burnt sienna and titanium white. So I'm just sort of adding this to kind of calm down that warmth. And then also I put a few little suggestions of shadows under the leading edge of the wave. In the past, I really exaggerated the purple effect. Today I'm trying to keep it somewhat natural feeling. And that's why, you know, normally I'd even contemplate leaving some of this warmth, but I do like, I like that it's, you know, kind of grayed down. All right, so here is what I finished up with. We'll do some close-ups, but first take a look at the whole composition here. As I mentioned, I try to arrange the waves in such a way that they seem random but appealing. And oftentimes one of the most challenging things for me is trying to decide, you know, what's gonna happen where the water meets the sand, you know, trying to decide what that shape is. Because I want it to look natural, and I also kind of want it to look like it's in motion. So I do spend, you know, a bit of time experimenting with that. The main thing I don't want is I don't want a straight line across, you know, the composition. So some sort of either angle or a little bit of a dip or whatever. The sand was actually a darker value in real life, but I wanted to keep the values in this painting light. You know, even the dark portions of the waves, I wanted them to be no darker than a mid-tone. Most of the values in this painting are mid-tone and lighter, which I think does create a sense of sort of misty atmosphere. All right, so we'll go in for a closer look. There's one thing I want to show you guys on the waves here. I always try to soften, you know, soften the edges, and as I mentioned, you know, keep the waves irregular in shape. Oftentimes when people paint waves from photographs, you can tell because there's all these hard edges on the white water. And I think that just doesn't really work for creating a feeling of motion. Down here you can see kind of the two-tone where I had the sand color and then came on top of it with the blue or blue-gray reflected sky. And then the same is true of the water in here. And I think it is those reflections that really, you know, bring this sort of painting to life. All right, so sometimes people get frustrated that I don't include the whole process. There are certain portions of the process that are really difficult to film. And so I'm gonna sort of talk about that with you guys. So, because it's actually easier to explain than it is to demonstrate via video, just because towards the end of the painting, a lot of what I'm doing is standing about 15 feet back from the panel. And what I'm doing is looking at in this case, I was looking at the ocean and looking at my panel and just looking back and forth to make sure that that the painting was capturing the feel and the atmosphere of the ocean. Were the values correct? Were the colors correct? And somehow I can't see those things as accurately when I'm standing even a few feet back from the painting. I've got to get back about 10 or 15 feet, sometimes even more, sometimes like 20 feet. I'll stand there and spend most of my time just looking and carefully comparing and looking for color shifts. Like one thing I noticed was that it was sort of a darker gray blue in the distance, and then it was greener in the foreground. I will share something that I find challenging, and that is to determine how to tint the white water. Because if you look at it, it looks white, right? It just like, you're like, what color is that? Like, how am I going to tint it? Am I tinting it green or purple or blue? So what I do is I will tint some titanium white using my palette. I'll mix in just a little bit of purple or a little bit of green. You know, I take a guess, but from experience, I know that purple often works. So anyway, I'll tint with purple. So titanium white, touch of dioxazine purple, mix that up, hold it up on my palette knife, comparing it to the white water. When I do that, when I'm comparing the two whites together, then I can see, I can really see which way it needs to go. And so that's how I determined that the white water in the back was sort of a greenish color and the white water in the front had a more purple tint. I mean, they're both of them are basically, you know, just titanium white with just barely any of a tint, but it does make a difference. So anyway, so that's kind of the process right there. Is just like the last portion is just standing back and adjusting the colors and values by looking at the scene and looking at my painting and just going back and forth and making those adjustments until I feel like I've captured the essence of the scene, you know, the atmosphere, the color, and all of that stuff. So, but like I said, it's kind of difficult to film that because they're just long gaps, and then it'll go up and paint for a minute, and then it's another long gap, and then paint for a minute. So anyway, that's the way that works. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you'd like to see some extra videos and help support the channel, there's a Patreon link down below. And I've got a bunch of extra videos on there, and it really does help support the channel. It allows me to keep making these videos, and it's much appreciated. So if that sounds interesting, check it out. Other than that, stay creative, and I'll see you guys in the next video.